Can you hear me?
Yes,
My internet
I
is
think
not
it's
great.
better.
So when we started doing transition in my town here in Totnes, we were trying to think of something that might work here, not anywhere else. So we were really, it's an amazing surprise that it is something that is considered useful by people in many, many other parts of the world now, in 50 countries now, in thousands of places. And it's I guess it's a question that there is a balanced question, because on the one hand, transition is much more complex and international and incredible and full of brilliant stories of change than I ever expected. And on the other hand, 1/3 of all of the carbon emissions ever produced by humanity have been produced in the time since we started the transition movement. So we haven't achieved the tipping point that we wanted to, but my sense is that that's a much bigger societal challenge, and that when society more generally internationally realizes the scale of the climate and ecological emergency, and recognizes the scale that change needs to happen on, that it's not just about electric cars and solar panels, it's a much deeper rethinking of everything, that the learning and the experience and the stories from the transition movement will be hugely important in that. So the transition movement has kind of been a laboratory of trying things out, meaning that when the time comes, which it needs to, when society recognizes we need to move, then there's a huge amount that can be learned from the transition movement. Well, people don't believe in something like transition for lots of very different reasons. Some people don't believe in it because they look at the movement and they don't see themselves reflected in it, and the transition movement is doing a lot of work to be more kind of inclusive and to speak for different voices and include different voices. Some people don't think that transition matters because climate change isn't a problem, which is an extraordinary position to still hold in 2021. I guess my sense is that what we try and do is that the transition movement has lots of different ways in for people. So if you're really interested in gardening and you want to connect more to people where you live, transition can be great because you can get involved in a project, you're starting food gardens in your town and you get to meet people. That's really good. If you're interested in business and starting new businesses, there's a way to get involved. If your interest is in storytelling, there's ways to get involved. My hope would be that people would be able to look at stories of the diversity of things that the transition movement do around the world, and to see something that feels really exciting that they'd like to be part of. But it's also really important to say that, not everybody is going to get involved in transition. Not everybody is going to like transition even necessarily, but you don't need everybody. What I've learned, that a group with 20 or 30 really committed people can achieve an enormous amount of stuff. And the projects that they do can then inspire other people to then get involved. So at the beginning, when it's a new thing, of course, everyone's not going to get involved in it. What have they done? Who are these people? If you've created some really great projects, then it gives people more confidence, and then it builds, and then it builds, and then it becomes more mainstream, and then you don't have to explain it, and then it's creating work for people and new businesses and new jobs, and then it just becomes part of society. So it's I don't think we need everybody, but the more you do and the more you work, then the more you become relevant to people. Because climate change impacts the poorest people first. The wealthier you are, the more you can believe that you have a degree of insulation from the problem. So I loved, a while ago, I went to Grand Sainte, near Dunkirk. I don't know if I pronounced that right, when Damien Carême was the mayor there. And Damien Carême's approach was really interesting, because his approach was everything we do for climate change has to benefit the poorest people in this town. So every time they would do an action that would save lots of energy and save them money, they would distribute the money they had saved to the poorest people. And they would build ecological housing for the poorest people. And I think that that's the approach that we need to take. That we need to be seeing this as an opportunity for a new kind of an economy, for a Green New Deal that should be creating lots of work and training opportunities for the poorest people where we live. The work that we do in many transition groups is about starting to build a new economy in those places and starting to create jobs. So, for example, in my town, we started a new brewery. We make fantastic beer. We could have conceived that as just being like a community volunteer brewing project. Actually, we are a brewery now. We employ 13 people, 14 people. And those people can now feed their family and have work, and that's what we need to be doing with this, I think. But also in the work that the government does at a national strategic level, we need a Green New Deal, which is about injecting a lot of money for training, because there is so much to do. If we are to get to zero carbon by 2030, 2035, there is so much to do, and the private sector is not going to do that. So it has to happen. How do we do it? We need a Green New Deal, and a Green New Deal, one of its fundamental ideas is that it starts in service to the poorest people in that economy. The transition movement never says the only thing we need is the transition movement. Transition movement is one piece of a jigsaw puzzle. So there are things we do as individuals, driving less, stopping flying, eating less meat, all these things. There are things that we do as the things that governments need to do, like in terms of climate change and things. We need things that business does. But transition is that piece that says, but what can we do where we are with the people around us? Maybe, and what we have found is that you can do a lot at that scale. You can do a lot of stuff that as an individual you can't do, as a government you would never think of, as business you would never do. So it's an important piece. And of course, the solution, if there, the solutions to the climate emergency will come from many, many different places, and they require system change. And they require governments to really act as if this is an emergency. But our hope is that a movement like transition is really important, because firstly, it means that people have an antidote to despair, because it's very easy to think government aren't doing anything, it's too late. So to be part of changing something where you live can start to give people some hope. The stories that the transition movement generates, and we see examples of it in France, where stories from the transition movement inspire people in government, inspire mayors, they then create examples, and then those examples then start to change the stories at a national level. That's sort of what the transition movement is doing. If we wait for permission from government, if we wait for permission from business, nothing will ever happen. So the transition movement is about saying, what can we do here? We need more than this, of course, but transition is a really key part of that. About 3 years ago, and visited a really nice permaculture project run by young people on the edge of Nice. That was really nice. And I think the one that I still use in my talks is that we went to and I don't know if I pronounce this properly, but we went to Montsartu. You know Montsartu? So we went to Montsartu, where they are doing a project. The municipality has created a garden to grow the food for all the schools. And it was so brilliant. And it was a story that I have taken to many, many other places. And I was so inspired about because that's something I talk about, that this is what we need to do. And in Montsartu, it already exists. And it was so beautiful. And so that's one of the stories that has really inspired me. And I hopefully on this tour, we might get to see some more projects that I can talk to other people about. So it is a future that is more local, where and really low carbon. So our cities and towns now have almost no cars, and lots of cycles and public transport, and the air smells amazing. There are many, many more trees in our cities. They're much less tidy because they are managed for biodiversity. So there is much more. They're less tidy, and so we hear much louder bird song. We have an economy which is much more diverse. So the big supermarchés from the past have been converted into lots of smaller businesses occupying those spaces. There has been a huge campaign to insulate people's homes, and now nobody lives in a house that is cold with high energy bills, and there is no homelessness anymore because we have tackled this problem by meeting the needs of the poorest people in our economies first. We now look at mental health and physical health and economic development and education as one whole thing. So we now see providing housing and access to good food as part of our strategy around mental health. People are much more active. They grow food where they have space. The relationships between town and city and countryside are much clearer because those economic relationships have been rebuilt, and we now invest a lot of money that we invested into very tough policing into poor communities, so the education is better, that there is a much more opportunity and sense of hope and well-being within those communities. And the kind of the big gap of inequality within the population has become much, much closer. So we don't see the kind of very extreme wealth and extreme poverty that we see in 2021. We're much more kind of in the middle, and people work 3 or 4 days a week rather than 5, and are supported to do so. So people have much more time. People have much more time for their imaginative lives, their creative lives, for their families. So we see much less. We see much stronger families because they have more time to be together, and they're supported to be together. I could go on and on and on and on, but that kind of thing.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I will see you then. Bye.